Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. What's going on with we're not matched up?
Your headroom is all messed up today, and there's only so much I can do.
No, not
before.
you, David.
Okay.
Not you.
You're great, David.
It's me.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
that didn't do it.
No, wrong one.
Do that. No, I like that.
There you go.
That
There we go.
makes me feel superior.
No, not there
I
we
like that.
go. Not.
All right, there we go. That's pretty close. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us, the executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen. David, welcome back to the show. Sorry about our little technical difficulties. But speaking of technical difficulties, let's just say this up front.
Yeah.
On Monday,
Yes.
the Prospect is doing a marathon show.
We're calling it a holiday telethon. So
Holiday telethon.
Put me in the Lou Rawls position of the Lou Rawls Parade of Stars, or the Jerry Lewis position.
I was just going to say Jerry Lewis. Yeah.
And yeah, we're raising money for the end of the year, and we're going to have a really great lineup of guests, including you and Emma. But also, we've got Matt Brunig, we've got Ryan Grimm, Ganesh Sitaraman talking about their new books, Lindsay Owens from Groundwork, Hassan Piker, Jeff Hauser, a bunch of former alumni of the Prospect, and Michael Kazin. And we're doing like a week of Majority Report shows in one day. And the idea is to really show that we're like, a nonprofit news media publication has about as good and proper a business model as X. And so we need the reason that we've survived is that we've gone out to our readers time and again. They've come through with support to allow us to tell these stories about ideas, politics, and power. And we're trying at the end of the year, as we move into 2024, to do it again. And so we're excited about doing this telethon and trying to raise as much money as we can.
And just to be clear, you guys did not pay $46 billion. I mean, I know you have the same business model as
40. I think it was
did.
42 I paid to get in. And it's not paying off, guys. No, we're obviously the scale is different, but the challenges are just as great. We don't take money from corporate advertisers. We don't, we don't have like a billionaire benefactor behind us, and we survive just like you survive on the generosity of your supporters. And so we need to come to you, once a year and ask for it.
Full disclosure, I am not only a member or Prospect, but also I donate at the end of each year. I've been doing that because it's a great news source and all the reasons you just said. So I'm really excited for Monday. I hope we
It'll be great.
Raise you guys a lot of money.
Be a lot of fun.
You're the second, off the top of my head, you're the second person we've had on the show from the Prospect this week. So
that's right.
Luke Goldstein was on.
Talking about his great work on the Google trial. Yeah.
And so excited about that, and I can't encourage people more. And it's all it's tax deductible too for people if they're looking for, right? I mean, isn't that
indeed we are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit organization. Our administrative expenses, we try to keep them as low as possible. Almost all the money that you give goes right into our journalism and right into producing the kind of stories that we talk about on this show all the time. And we really, in order for us to bring you the stories with the breadth and the depth that we like to do, it takes resources. And hopefully if you value it, you can afford it, you'll be able to give us your support.
All right, great. Well, let's dig into some of the stuff that you've written this week. It covers sort of the gamut of what we had this week. Let's just start with the and the National Defense Authorization Act, that passed yesterday in the House, and I think the Senate the day before. You'd written a piece earlier in the week that the Congressional Progressive Caucus had basically said we're not going to vote for this. I think primarily around Section 702, but there may have been more. Tell us how that worked out.
The broader issue is that all year long there has been this bipartisan agreement that we didn't want to continue this warrantless spying program under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that keeps getting American citizens, U.S. persons, caught up in the dragnet. The FBI has disclosed hundreds of thousands of violations because they're just searching on U.S. people that basically all of these FISA intercepts, whether it's emails or audio, go into a database, and it's a searchable database. And the FBI can just pull from it if they want to look for things that have nothing to do with foreign intelligence, like gang surveillance. If they want to, I believe there were some queries that were put on donors to a political campaign. There's just been tremendous abuse of this particular section of the FISA law. And it was expiring at the end of this year, which gave this bipartisan group an opportunity to really reform it and to put in the safeguards needed so that Americans aren't being spied on. And, throughout the year, different bills were being put together, and it looked like it was coming down to two bills. There was going to be a bill in the judiciary, came out of the House Judiciary Committee, passed 35-2 out of the House Judiciary, and it had real teeth for reform. It was on a bipartisan basis. You had Jim Jordan and Jerry Nadler coming together on this bill. And then you had this thing at the House Intelligence Committee, which was just sort of a conduit for the intelligence community to say they were reforming something without actually doing it. And so at the beginning of the week, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, did two things. The first thing he did is he said, all right, well, we need more time to figure out which one of these we're going to put forward. So let's just put an extension into the defense bill, which was moving. It's a must-pass bill, passes every year for the last 62 years. So let's just put an extension until April of this FISA provision into the NDAA, and in April we'll take care of it. And the second thing he did is he said, okay, I'm going to put the House Intelligence Bill and the House Judiciary Bill up for a vote, and whatever gets more votes, that becomes our baseline bill. This is a process called Queen of the Hill. This is something that's done periodically in Congress. Well,
and by baseline bill, you mean the bill that it's going to be extended to the 18th, but it's until April, according to this plan. But the baseline bill means then you can put amendments and work off of that bill.
The substitute, it would expire, but then this would take action. Whatever it was, whether it was the judiciary bill or the intelligence
Okay,
bill.
So if nothing happens by April, the default bill ends up being this bill. Is that it?
Well, it would have to pass. Something has to pass after April, right? So either it expires and you can't do this anymore, or they extend it, or they pass a bill to replace it, a substitute, and that would have to pass the House and Senate and get signed by the president. So. What happened was that the Republicans, this is a very familiar story, they got so mad at one another about having to put themselves on the record for one bill or the other, and there was so much infighting, and people wanted Mike Johnson to just take a side, that he ended up pulling both bills. So they're off the table completely. So now all that's left is this extension to April, but it's not really an extension to April, and here's why. There's an annual recertification process for FISA and for this section of FISA that happens every April. And once that recertification is in place, all wiretaps can continue for a year until the next annual certification. So this 4-month extension is actually really a 16-month extension. It takes us into 2025. It takes us into the next Congress, and it takes us potentially into a new president. And so this is why, folks in both parties were so angry about this, that this really relieves the pressure to extend this and to do something about this FISA situation in this Congress. And so the Progressive Caucus was against it. A lot of people on the far right were against it. However, it was attached to a must-pass bill. It was attached to the defense bill. Nobody likes to vote against the defense bill. And but it was very telling what ended up happening. So in the Senate, if a provision this was done through a conference committee. So the House passed a version of the NDAA, the Senate passed a version of the NDAA, and then they had a conference and they put together a final bill. If they stick something in that is not in either the House bill or the Senate bill, which is what they did with this FISA extension, there is a point of order that can be raised and say that's not legal. You got to take that out of the bill. Then you can, the Senate can waive that point of order. So there was a vote, and it needed 60 votes, that if it was unsuccessful, the FISA thing would have come out. The extension would have come out. That passed 65-35. So it barely passed. And a lot of your friends, a lot of your people that you wouldn't think would be for warrantless spying voted for that. And I put the rundown on Twitter, but Fetterman voted for it. The Pennsylvania senators, New Hampshire senators, both New York senators, both California senators. It was a bipartisan way to keep this extension in. And so then the FISA bill passed, or the NDA passed with 87 votes, I think, in the Senate. And then in the House, there was another opportunity because they tried to do it quickly to get out of town under what they call suspension of the rules. So it needed a 2/3 vote in the House, and it got 310 votes, which was barely over the line of that, with over 100 people voting no on both sides of the aisle. But the upshot is that now we have this FISA warrantless spying extended through April, but really kind of longer. And so it's unclear whether, even though there is majority support in both houses, is what we're told, to reform this process, I'm not sure it's going to get reformed.
It doesn't feel like there's a majority of support to reform it in both houses, or did they just get outmaneuvered?
I think they got outmaneuvered. I mean, when you put it into a bill that supports the troops, right? When you put it into a bill that always passes, that has a lot of goodies in it for every member of Congress, it's difficult for them to vote against that.
Right.
Now, I mean, the separation vote in the Senate does show that there's significant support against it, but maybe not full support against it. But people who voted for that can justify it by saying, oh, well, that's just a short-term thing. We can't let this completely expire, and we are going to reform it in April. But we'll see if that's actually true.
Mike Johnson really seems to be good at punting.
Oh, that's the only thing he's good at. That's the only thing he's good at. There have been, now with the NDAA, there have been 23 bills that have passed since the beginning of the 118th Congress.
Will you put that in context to us? I mean, because that seems like, that
is not a lot.
I've never passed a law myself.
The context is, some of those are namings of federal buildings, right? Like naming things after people. Some of those are the three that would be seen as not minor tweaks are the extension of the debt limit, the extension of government funding in September, and the extension of government funding in November. Basically, punting has been the main activity, and also sort of acting like a neighborhood watch program by censuring people and expelling people and stuff like that. That's really all this Congress has done.
According to Wikipedia, Congress enacts somewhere between 200 and 600 statutes during its biennial terms.
Right. So we're below that pace.
Significantly, it would appear.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the supplemental, because you wrote a piece just, I don't know, an hour ago about what, as far as I can tell, amounts to a Biden cave on the border. And you write that it's a sort of a classic Biden move, where it's almost done for the sake of almost like some notion of bipartisanship. There was a story that that I also read about the border, that there's real concern that I guess this came from Semaphore. Let me just give you this quote, and then you can talk about the process as you understand it. Aaron Reichland Melnick, a policy director at the American Immigration Council, noted that the Supreme Court has heard 3 cases over the past 5 years dealing with immigration about the placement of the letter A in one portion of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. And the issue there is, and you bring this up in terms of like, how do people try and fix immigration in a matter of like a week and a half when it's been a problem that's been dogging people, is that they are drafting legislation right now so quickly. And I don't think people appreciate this about statutes enough. They're drafting it so quickly that they can't really get experts in there to look at it, to really understand what it's going to mean once it gets challenged. All these things always gets challenged. I mean, like, I know this as the son of a lawyer who wrote contracts, that like contracts are, you've got to be very specific. You've got to, each word means something in the legal vernacular. And these contracts only get scrutinized if there is a problem. And then the level of scrutiny they get is not anywhere near what a statute about immigration is going to get. And so they really have no idea what they're doing in terms of the implications of these things, because they're not bringing in experts.
I mean, that's all definitely true. I guess I would be more worried about that if I actually thought it was going to pass.
All right. Well, fair enough. Take us through the whole thing.
The reason I don't think it's going to pass is that I see no difference between this effort, other than the fact that it's rushed, like you say, and other efforts that we've seen over the last 3 presidencies. So in 2006, you had this, I think it was called the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act of 2006, between Bush, McCain was very involved. It was a tough negotiation between the Senate and the White House. They get 62 votes. They pass this thing. It had a path to citizenship. And the House is like, we're not doing it. In 2013, you had Obama and the Senate really put their heads together, put together this comprehensive immigration reform bill. It got 68 votes. It had a path to citizenship for after 13 years. So it was barely a path to citizenship. Right. And then a bunch of punitive border security measures. And the House is like, we're not doing it. And so now we have this negotiation between the Senate and the president trying. Now there's no path to citizenship. There's no difference, no new path for any migrant coming in. It's purely punitive. It's just trying to stop people from coming over. And the Senate has said, we're not interested in that. We're interested in our bill. That's the only way you're going to get money for Ukraine, which is the trade here, is a border policy deal for Ukraine. They say they want our bill, which is much more punitive than anything Biden has put on the table. And the House has left town. So what are we doing here, I guess is the question. I think you can learn some lessons from this, though, right? Because in the last 20 years, what has happened is, as the hardliners, the anti-immigrant forces in the House have said no, the deal has got more and more and more and more punitive, right? It's just gotten worse from the perspective of the balance of, adding a path to citizenship in exchange for some sort of border security thing, and now it's that is 0 on the path to citizenship level and about 100 on the border security thing. And so you ask yourself, why are we doing this over and over again, and everything gets worse and nothing really changes? And I think you have to look at how Biden has handled the border, and how the Democrats more broadly have handled the border as a policy. And
they're always chasing the negative perception about him. I think in your article you mentioned that Biden it's seemingly concerned about the polling numbers showing him being too liberal on the border. And there's no foresight. It just drives me insane of providing a counter narrative. They see this degradation, and yet they're consistently trying to move towards the right, as opposed to being like, what is our alternative vision? I mean, I think Obama tried that with the Dreamers, but Biden seems to have abandoned it altogether.
I think that's totally right. He has seen the border as a problem to be solved. That's it. And he's seen it as something that he wants to get off the front page, which is a ludicrous notion, right? Like, if, let's say that there's a world where this deal actually passes, do you really think that Fox News is now going to run stories about how great the border is now, that there's flowers and rainbows at the border because of this deal? Obviously, they can spin any piece of footage into saying that we have a lawless and chaotic border to the rest of the people who don't live near one, right? So it's the idea that there is a common set of facts around immigration is what's driving this fanciful hope that you can take it off the table. You can't take it off the table, and moreover, it's very unclear, since the Biden administration has been restrictive at the border in a cascading way from the very beginning. They have tried to get people, they've tried to remove headlines by stopping people, making sure they get an appointment with an app that doesn't really work.
Extending Title 42, doing the remain in Mexico.
And did Fox News give him praise for that? No.
Well, but not only that. I mean, in tangible terms, every time they've made a change to the policy, there has been a short drop, a temporary drop in border crossings. And then migrants figure out, well, some people are getting through, so I should go. And it's better than the life that I'm consigned to in my home country. And so I'm going to go. And then the crossings surge again. This is more of a global displacement problem because of climate change, because of authoritarianism, because of violence in the home countries. And it's an infrastructure problem in that we don't have the resources to deal with the number of people coming over. It is not the Customs and Border Patrol isn't being mean enough problem. The problem is much different than that, much broader than that. And no opportunity to try to shut the border is going to change that.
And there's also this dynamic where, I mean, you mentioned the two prior attempts, and all I can think of is in 2006, it was Levin and Laura Ingraham who really sort of undercut George Bush. I mean, the talk radio just hammered him. And then in 2013, we were mentioning, I remember Marco Rubio was champion. This was going to be Marco Rubio's day, and he was going to, this was going to catapult him to be a statesman. And it literally, his career has never been the same. He had to backtrack off that and walk away from it. And structurally, there's it is easier for the right on this topic insofar as all they need to do is nothing. And the problem gets, increases and metastasizes in terms of we're not providing a path to citizenship. We're not providing resources in which to follow our own statutes here. And there's never been, and this is what you're
not just our own statutes, but international law. By the way, and around asylum.
and you make this point in your piece, and Emma was just making it. There has not been a concerted effort by the Democrats to create a narrative, any type of narrative around the reasons why like immigration is good and why it's not just how do we deal with this problem, but rather how do we reinterpret this phenomena, if you will, as something that is positive, and how do we make it work within the context of our country and benefit from it?
And that's why public polling shows that the border is out of control and policies are bad and immigration is bad, because they're getting no other information than that. So that's where the direction is. And now the one other thing on this that needs to be said is that you can definitely spin an argument that, well, Republicans have kind of turned against funding for Ukraine. And so this is a convenient way for them to point fingers elsewhere on that by saying, all we want is a deal of immigration reform, border reform in exchange for the Ukraine money. We'll give you that money. All you have to do is solve this unsolvable problem that we've had for the last 2 decades. You could say that. However, the person that actually tied those two policies together was Joe Biden. So the initial supplemental request had 4 things. It had money for Ukraine. It had money for Israel. It had a little bit of money for Taiwan. And then it had money for border security. And the reason it did is Biden thought, well, maybe I can peel off a few Republicans
this is what's so
by adding border security
about
money.
This guy's
So
negotiations.
He walked right into that, and they said, oh, borders on the table? Okay, give us this, and this. And
this
so he walked into this box.
Wait, I mean, this is the story of, I mean, putting aside ideology and whatnot, who knows, right? But putting aside all that, this is the story of Joe Biden's like entire career in terms of negotiations, it seems like. This is why the guy who McConnell sought out to go behind Harry Reid's back when the great bargain, the grand bargain was on the table. And ultimately, Social Security was only saved by the Freedom Caucus, who refused to say yes to anything. But here he is right here going in, pre-negotiating something, thinks he's being clever and dealing with the Senate from like the 1950s, essentially. And like, I'm going to show my goodwill. The same sort of like thing with Israel. Like, oh, if I get in close with them, when it's time when if we need to, cut things off, they're laughing at him right now in Jerusalem. They're just laughing at this guy.
And by the way, the McConnell parallel is very salient here, because 2 weeks ago, these talks were going absolutely nowhere. They were being conducted by Chris Murphy for the Democrats and James Lankford, a senator from Oklahoma, for the Republicans. And McConnell got up and said, the only way this gets done is if Joe Biden gets involved. And
because Joe Biden gives us the store, and that's the only way that he's going to give us everything we could possibly imagine.
And indeed, he has been trying to. And if there was, a House that had any level of sanity around this issue, or a House, I should say, maybe that doesn't want the issue as an issue rather than to fix it, then McConnell would have won this fleecing.
And I'm sorry, for all of his time in Congress, does Biden not want to just try to play out a little bit what it's going to look like for the House Republicans to continuously hold up billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine and obviously to Israel when look, I understand the Republican Party is fashioning itself as isolationist in some circles, but in the end, the defense contractors want to win out, and they want that package going to Ukraine for sure.
Well, I mean, they certainly passed $886 billion for the Pentagon just 2 days ago. So certainly the power of the defense industry is shown there. And by the way, why can't a little of that money go to these important foreign policy challenges if you really needed it? That's the question I always ask.
So,
what do you need a supplemental for?
Is it your sense that the supplemental is dead in the water,
I don't see it getting unstuck. Now maybe after this negotiation plays out and the House Republicans scotch it, that maybe they take the position that Emma suggested they take and just tried to blast Republicans on this isolationism and lining up with Vladimir Putin or whatever. It's hard because you have two different wars that they're trying to fund here, and one of them Democrats aren't really interested in lining up with what Biden wants to do, which is give billions more dollars to essentially commit genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
Do Democrats not want that? Bernie was the only Democrat.
I'm talking about more the rank and file than lawmakers at that point.
Well, I'm curious though about your assessment of, yes, the rank and file, but like your assessment of the split in the Senate, because Bernie was the only senator to vote against that package, and in the House, obviously, there's around a couple dozen in terms of opposition.
Yeah, I don't. It's very hard to divine exactly what's going on there. I guess Jake Sullivan talked to Netanyahu and said this has to end in a few weeks, and Netanyahu said, "Okay, I'm going to go back to throwing bombs down now." So it doesn't look like this vaunted control that the White House thinks they have over Netanyahu is at all in evidence. At that point, Democrats are on the sidelines. If Netanyahu obviously has the continued firepower without $14 billion. And by the way, let's not forget that Joe Biden's administration circumvented federal law to supply, I believe it was tank weapons, to Israel without congressional authorization. And so he was willing to do that in support of this, despite claiming that, they're getting uneasy and things need to wrap up.
And we spoke to Ari Talani at Women for Weapons Trade Transparency. And apparently, another sort of feature of our empire is that we have essentially a huge weapons cache. We have them in different places around the globe. One of them happens to be in Israel, and it's almost like it's sort of they have like you take the cart around the warehouse and pull what you want, and we'll put it on your tab type of situation. $4 billion worth of weaponry stored there, and Israel has a carte blanche to go in and take what they need. And so
more broadly, you think about that in the context of arguing about a supplemental amount of money to fund.
It's a supplement to the
operations.
Supplements is really what it is.
I think it's, more broadly, I think it's a way to hook in Congress onto a policy that otherwise the White House can do themselves. It is maddening to me that we are giving almost $1 trillion to the Pentagon, and then we need more.
And so you're suggesting that the supplemental acts not just as like the material benefits, but it is a sort of like a political commitment that they're making that forces them into that, and it's just sort of like put in that context of it being like an existential vote as opposed to a one that sort of says we're behind this policy.
I think that's true, and Pentagon accounting, who even knows what people have and where, but I do think there's an element of that to it, and so it's not that I'm skeptical that in the absence of a supplemental, Ukraine really might have a dwindling supply of ammunition. That could be true, but at the same time, federal law was circumvented to give Israel what they needed. Right. So, where are we?
All right. Well, let's move on to one more. Well, I get a couple more things I wanted to talk to you about, but the stock market apparently went bonkers yesterday because The Fed indicated that that they may be looking at rate cuts in 2024, and maybe a coincidence that you had written just days ago that they should be looking at rate cuts. I don't know.
I think
You tell me.
It's absolutely a coincidence. Well, no, I mean,
Are you suggesting what? No.
I think it's data driven. I
Right.
mean, we have very successfully seen inflation drop to basically the level that the Fed wants. I mean, if you look at 6-month, their favorite measure, which is personal consumption expenditures, you look at the last 6 months and it's at 2%. 2% is sort of this target for inflation. So, and I don't want to raise my hands in victory to the Federal Reserve for doing that. It was very clearly, and we're seeing more evidence of this day after day, very clearly about supply chain easing.
100%.
And so what we have now is the Fed having raised rates for over a year. The inflation has come down. The Fed rates are doing damage. I mean, we may not see it yet in the unemployment statistics, but we certainly are seeing it in housing starts. We're seeing it in research and development, which dropped in the third quarter of the year. We're seeing it in
rising rents,
delayed production of factories, delayed production of a lot of these new energy things, which are front loaded in terms of the capital costs that you have. And if those capital costs go up, so the impact of interest rates is real, and it's long lasting too, because right now a lot of people haven't moved because if they move and they have to get another, I'm talking about homeowners right now. If they have to get another home, their mortgage rate will rise significantly. But eventually people do move or they do sell their homes. And so the impact of those rates will only grow in the future. It's the same with corporate loans. As they roll over, the rates get higher. These things only get worse over time. And so, I talked to some folks at Employ America, which has been making this case for significant rate reductions in 2024. If you want to credit anyone for what the Fed did, it'd be Employ America more than me. But, their points were unemployment problems happen suddenly. And once we're in the middle of them, it's hard to get them to stop. So that's number one. Number two is be consistent. When inflation went up a bit, you raised rates. Now that it's come down, be consistent. That speaks to credibility and how business participants can handle it. And then three, what I was talking about the long-term impact of high interest rates.
The best way to describe this, I was trying to explain this to my kid, is like in terms of like how these rates can have an impact. It's like when you're in the shower and you get in and it feels a little bit cold, and so you push the thing down to hot. But the hot water takes a little bit to get through the system. All the cold water's got to push out, and then all of a sudden you're there, and that's when you get scalded. And that is, I think, like the fear here is that this is all building up. It was largely unnecessary because of these the inflation issues being largely a function of, I mean, certainly between supply chain and profiteering, and then just some coincidental
and the war
in terms of oil prices. And some coincidental things like, the bird flu for the chickens and some other issues. All those things sort of conspired, and the fact that we had a pandemic that also changed consumption habits slightly for a period of time that are slowly returning back to sort of some type of baseline. I think the rental stuff and being locked into the housing that people have at this point, they hold off on that other kid because they can't get into a bigger apartment or a bigger house. People can't go in and get their first houses. You have building starts. All of that stuff is conspired.
So if the Fed actually does do what they say they're going to do and start bringing rates down, I mean, you could get a virtuous circle going where suddenly it's better to invest. Investment happens because it's buffeted by the Inflation Reduction Act. Instead of us offsetting that by high interest rates, we're now playing into it. And with the various public investment available, we'll see more factories being built. That's more jobs. If inflation stays moderate and people sort of get accustomed to this price level while wages continue to rise, you could see, good things happening in 2024.
It's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the perspective on the economy. I mean, I think there's other factors, but I think housing is a huge part, and repayments of student debt and all of those things all play into this.
Speaking of housing, I just saw a headline that homelessness is up 12% to its highest level since reporting began in 2007, according to the Associated Press. So, these numbers about the economy, that we need to be starting to calculate housing into the way that people are necessarily feeling the effects of that economy.
I mean, we seem to realize that when uninsurance premiums were unaffordable, that you'd have a higher rate of uninsured. When housing costs are very high, you have a higher rate of homeless people.
Let's lastly just talk a little bit about Google. We spoke to Luke Goldstein earlier in the week on the really big case with Google that the U.S. government is bringing in terms of their search, their monopoly over search.
Right.
But there was another case that had, I think, just been decided, or at least we reported on just moments before Luke was actually on. I think it was on Wednesday, or maybe it was Tuesday. That was a suit that was not brought by the U.S. government, but was rather brought by a gaming company that offered its game on the Google platform for apps. And they won. What are the implications of that case?
Huge implications. First of all, this is the first antitrust case that Google or really any big tech company has lost. And it was lost through a jury trial, unanimous verdict on all counts. So just that alone, that perception of that alone, that Google has been labeled a monopolist in a court of law is very important. Now let's get to the specifics.
But why?
Why is that important?
Yeah,
because it pierces the sort of impregnable nature of these companies that say that they're following the law in all respects. Google has 6, or I don't know exactly how many, but a number of other trials going on at the same time. Now, after the precedent is set that Google is a monopolist in this one aspect, it's harder for the judge in the search case to dismiss all of the information that he saw in that trial and say, no, Google's not a monopolist.
And we should say that one of the things that Luke told us was this judge isn't necessarily the thing with antitrust in this country is that the laws have not changed, but for a 40-year period, the perspective on how you apply the law and what the sort of inputs are, the way you perceive the inputs into that law changed. And so a judge sitting there on the federal bench comes out of that milieu, if you will, of perception about what constitutes antitrust violations, and to see that the context has changed, not just because Lena Khan is at the FTC or Jonathan Kanter is at the DOJ, but even in the context of the way the public perceives what monopoly is going to impact their decision making. But when was the last time we saw a company of Google size be charged with being a monopolizer? And we should say this again. What are the implications of it being brought by a private party as opposed to some wild-eyed political ideologue in some agency?
Well, it shows that private litigation is an important part of the antitrust laws in this country. I mean, the Sherman Antitrust Act specifically allowed for a private right of action because they thought, well, maybe the forces in government will be captured, or maybe they just won't have enough resources. So we need a million eyes rather than one pair of eyes. So it just shows the importance of that. The case itself also has some similarities to what's going on at the Google search trial in DC. So Epic Games, which owns Fortnite, is who brought this case. And they operate when they're on Android phones. I have an Android phone right here. The only way that you can get an app on an Android phone is to go through the Google Play Store. That's the only way. You cannot get an app any other way. And because of that, Google charges for any in-app purchase. If you're buying something like in a game, sometimes you have to buy a new weapon, or you buy some aspect of the game. Google charges a 30% toll on all revenue that's from an app because they can, because that's the price you pay for access to Google's customers on the Android phone. And it was described at trial that Google discouraged other companies by paying them off to not develop other app stores. Now, this is very analogous to what's happening in the Google search trial, where Google paid for access to be the exclusive search engine on browsers and mobile devices. So there's a pretty similar relationship going on here. When Epic Games tried to encourage people to not use the app, but to pay them separately for the game and do it on a browser, Google, the Play Store, kicked Epic Games off of their app store. So this is, and this was shown in the trial to be an exercise of market power to harm competition, to harm other companies, and to ultimately harm the consumer experience. And so a lot of those things are applicable to the other trials that Google is involved in right now.
What happened with the Apple case? Didn't Epic bring an Apple case as well?
Epic did bring a case against Apple. It ended with Apple at an appeals court level from a judge, not a jury, and we can talk about that. But the judge said that Apple was not a monopolist, essentially, on all counts but one, and that case is under appeal right now. Epic is appealing it potentially to the Supreme Court. But that's an interesting difference, though, right? You have judges who are steeped sort of in this milieu, as you talked about, of antitrust law over the last 40 years. And then you have ordinary people who are faced with the situation that I just described and said, yeah, Google's a monopolist, clearly. You can't get any other apps on an Android phone other than going through this one gatekeeper. It's intuitive. And so I think the importance of using juries here is also
two things. One, big beef on our IM says Google Play Store users can enable side loading apps, including other apps.
There is side loading, but then they try to discourage other companies from developing app stores, and B, they try to crack down on side loading and crack down. I mean, this is essentially what Epic Games was trying to do, and they kicked them off the app store. So the fact is that most people aren't going to do that. I mean, as much as you think.
No, right. Yes, that's the other parallel too with the default browser.
Right. You can change the default.
You can change it, but it's 4 clicks.
Aren't going to do that.
And Google knows the value of being the default browser. That's why they spend billions of dollars on doing it.
Just as they know that there's value in being the default app store.
Can you?
I just one. Is this going to be appealed? I mean, if the Apple decision,
it's likely to have an appeal. Right now, what happened is the jury found guilty on all counts, and now they move to a remedy phase. And at the remedy phase, it's actually the judge's discretion to say, well, how do we fix this? They could allow for multiple app stores. They could say, Google, you can't take a cut from these other companies on in-app purchases. they could break up, sever Google's Play Store from the parent company. I mean, there's a number of things they could do.
Do you know how Epic Games was able to get a jury trial for this? Did they specifically request it?
Yeah, I believe they did. And the interesting thing is that it wasn't Epic Games was among several app developers that tried to sue Google over this conduct. And what Google did is it paid off the other litigants in the trial, and the plaintiffs settled all those cases, except for Epic Games. They were the only ones that said, no, we want to see this through, and we want to fix this ecosystem.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
David Dayen, we will see you on Monday, I guess, at like 2:35, I think it's going to be, right after our show. We're going to hop
right
on
after the show.
Your telethon, your Jerry
and
Lewis telethon.
Let me just say, we're doing that, yes, and we're doing it all day from 12 to 8 Eastern. It's going to be live on YouTube at our YouTube channel, at the American Prospects YouTube channel. You'll also find it at prospect.org. You'll find it on our Twitter feed at The Prospect. And while you're there, we will give you all the information you need on how to donate. Any dollar amount you want, $1, $2. I mean, we appreciate so much the support of our readers. And
are you going to be doing this from a studio? Is it going to be from? Are you going to be on that couch?
I'm going to be here. Others are going to be elsewhere. This is all from beaming in from across the country.
No backdrop.
Nope.
It's just going to be that.
Well, there's going to be like a little graphic on the screen for how to donate and stuff, but that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well,
we don't all have the unlimited resources of a studio.
Oh yeah, this stuff is like you can't.
That's
just
made out of granite, and I think that's neat.
Yes, people don't realize we've
really
chiseled
tell the value.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're looking at it at home.
Exactly. Yes. Just hope that people just have not visited an IKEA store. That's the key with our backdrop. David Dayen, always a pleasure, and looking forward to Monday.
All right. See you Monday. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.